The chill of an early New York morning clung to the air like a quiet warning. Steam rose from subway grates, and pedestrians tucked their chins into scarves, bracing against the wind. Amid the rhythm of footsteps and the distant hum of horns, there was a break in the pattern, an odd kind of beauty carved out of hardship and defiance. On the southeast corner of 73rd and Madison, where the city's noise usually swallowed all softness, a barefoot girl danced. She couldn't have been more than 15. Her dark skin gleamed under layers of city dust, and her oversized hoodie fluttered with each movement. Talia had no music playing, no earphones hidden beneath her wild tangle of curls. The only beat she moved to was the one inside her, deep, instinctual, undeniable. She twirled with the elegance of someone who had never known a stage but carried one in her soul. Her feet slapped lightly against the concrete, forming a rhythm that passers-by couldn't ignore. People noticed her. Some threw coins in the open shoebox near her feet. Others barely glanced, rushing past her with the same indifference they gave to gum on the sidewalk. But a few, just a few, stopped. Their eyes widened, their phones came out. They didn't understand what they were seeing, not entirely. Was it performance? Desperation? Hope? Talia didn't care. She wasn't dancing for them. This corner was hers. She came here every morning, just after the bakery opened across the street. She'd sneak a piece of bread from the alley's donation bin before the manager noticed her. Then she'd pull her hoodie tighter around her, stretch her aching legs, and start to move. It was the only thing that ever made her feel real. Like she was more than the girl from the shelter, more than the kid who didn't have a home since her mama passed. When she danced, she wasn't broken. She wasn't hungry. She was just free. Across the avenue, behind tinted glass in a van parked near the curb, a boy watched her. His name was Eli, though few people used it. Mostly, he was Mr. Walker's son, heir to a tech fortune, face hidden from the public since a spinal injury 2 years ago left him in a wheelchair. He didn't speak much, not since the accident. His world was routines, appointments, and therapies that never seemed to do much of anything. He hadn't smiled in months. But something about the girl on the corner stirred something in him. His nurse, Ms. Linda, noticed it first. Eli leaned forward in his seat. His eyes tracked the girl's every movement like he was studying the answer to a question that had haunted him. When she leaped, his fingers twitched on the armrest. When she spun, his lips parted just slightly, as if he could almost remember what it felt like to fly. The driver, seeing the shift, slowed the van to a stop. Traffic honked. No one cared. Inside that silent van, Eli pressed a single button on his custom tablet. It was labeled, "Stay." The van waited. Outside, Talia danced. She didn't know someone was watching her, someone whose life was about to be changed forever by a girl who had nothing but rhythm and a dream she wouldn't let the world take. The next morning, Talia was back on the corner, her breath puffing out in clouds as she warmed up her limbs with slow, deliberate stretches. Her thin hoodie did little to protect her from the chill, but she danced through worse. Cold was temporary. Movement was forever. She began like she always did, with a gentle sway, her arms rising like waves, her feet gliding over concrete as if it were polished wood. The world around her blurred. The sounds of honking taxis, barking dogs, and hurried footsteps faded until only the music in her mind remained. Across the street, Eli was already watching. This time, his nurse Linda wheeled him closer, positioning his chair just behind the bench that faced the corner. His fingers rested on his lap, his face calm but alert. For a boy whose days were painted in sterile whites and soft grays, this moment felt vivid, colorful. There was a pull in his chest he couldn't explain, like something dormant had stirred inside him. Talia noticed them eventually. She slowed her dance, unsure. The sight of the wheelchair, the clean-cut nurse, and the black van made her wary. Sometimes cops sat like that before asking her to move. But the boy didn't look like he was here to make trouble. He looked curious. Maybe even shy. His eyes weren't cold or judging. They were searching. Without warning, music began to play from the van's speakers. It wasn't loud, just enough to catch her attention. A jazz track, soft and soulful, floated into the crisp morning air. Talia's brows furrowed. She tilted her head toward the boy, and he gave the slightest nod. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. She hesitated, then stepped forward. Her movements shifted, responding to the new rhythm. Where before she had danced to the chaos in her own head, now she danced with purpose, her body melting into the smooth lines of the trumpet, bending with the curve of each note. It was a conversation without words. Eli tapped his finger on the arm of his chair, finding the beat. Talia grinned, then threw in a spin that made a few pedestrians stop in their tracks. A tiny crowd began to form. People pointed their phones. Someone dropped a $5 bill in her shoebox. Talia didn't care. She was no longer dancing just for survival. She was dancing with someone. And for the first time, someone was dancing back, even if he couldn't move his legs. Over the next few days, the routine became a ritual. Eli's nurse brought him each morning like clockwork. Sometimes he came with speakers, other times with just his tablet loaded with tracks. Talia adjusted to whatever he gave her, hip-hop, swing, even classical piano. She didn't flinch. She turned everything into motion, a kind of magic that made time irrelevant. They began to understand each other in that quiet, musical language. Talia started using her hands more, guiding Eli through mimic gestures. He'd follow, stiff at first, but with each passing day, his movements became more confident. His nurse stood nearby, quietly astonished. Talia didn't know his name yet, and he didn't know hers. But names felt unnecessary. What they shared was deeper, two kids from opposite worlds finding common ground on a cracked sidewalk through rhythm, breath, and the beat of a borrowed song. The morning felt wrong from the start. The city woke as it always did, rushed, loud, indifferent, but something was missing. Eli sat quietly in his chair, bundled in a navy wool coat, his breath fogging up the window of the van. Linda had parked across the street like usual, and the speaker sat in his lap, waiting to be turned on. But Talia didn't show. At first, he told himself she was just late. Maybe she found warmer socks. Maybe she got breakfast. Maybe she was talking to someone. But as minutes passed, then a full hour, Eli's shoulders sank deeper into his chair. His fingers tapped no rhythm. The van was still, the music silent. He stared at the empty corner as if he could will her into being. Linda offered gentle suggestions. Maybe she had another place to dance. Maybe she'd be back tomorrow. But Eli shook his head, barely moving. He knew. Talia never missed a morning, not once since they started. She danced even when it rained, even when the wind turned brutal. Something was wrong. By noon, Eli stopped responding altogether. He refused his water. He pushed away the tablet with his communication app. His eyes stayed on the corner, dark and blank. When his father called during lunch, Linda answered. She debated whether to say anything. Mr. Walker wasn't the kind of man who cared for emotional distractions. But something in her voice cracked when she explained what had happened. "She's homeless," she said. "A child. And she meant something to your son." For once, Mr. Walker didn't interrupt. He didn't sigh or dismiss it. He simply said, where was the last place she was seen? By late afternoon, a search began. Mr. Walker's team canvassed the neighborhood with quiet urgency. They checked nearby shelters, alleys, soup kitchens. They asked deli clerks and bus drivers, offering a printed photo from one of the viral videos that had recently surfaced of Talia dancing with Eli. Most hadn't seen her in 2 days. One bakery worker mentioned she'd looked pale the morning before. "Coughed a lot," he muttered. She was shivering but still danced. The words landed like stones in Eli's chest. They found her that night, curled behind a dumpster behind the same bakery, her body trembling violently under a layer of damp cardboard. Her lips were blue, her breathing shallow. She tried to sit up when she saw the lights and heard someone call her name, but she collapsed again, her voice barely a rasp. "I didn't want to miss him," she whispered. "I thought I could still dance today." She was burning with fever, her face slick with sweat despite the cold. Paramedics lifted her gently onto a stretcher, wrapping her in thermal blankets as Mr. Walker stood nearby, hands clenched at his sides. He watched his son's face as Eli was wheeled forward, eyes wide and brimming. For a brief second, Talia looked up through heavy lids and met Eli's gaze. He reached out, brushing her fingers with his. Her lips trembled in a smile, but her eyes closed again. The hospital room was too quiet, too white. Machines beeped in slow, steady rhythms, and the air carried that sterile smell that clung to everything, even skin. Talia lay motionless in the bed, her face pale against the pillow, an oxygen tube running beneath her nose. For lines snaked from her arm, delivering antibiotics, fluids, and warmth her body couldn't create on its own anymore. Her curls were tied back loosely, damp from the fever that had finally begun to break. She had been there for 3 days. Eli hadn't left. He sat in the chair beside her bed, refusing to go home despite the doctor's recommendation. His father pulled strings to keep the private room open, even going as far as installing a fold-out cot for Eli and Linda. Eli didn't want the cot. He wanted the chair next to her, where he could see her chest rise and fall and know that, at least for now, she was still fighting. No one had expected this kind of attachment. Not from the boy who hadn't spoken a word in 2 years. Not from the girl who had nothing to offer but movement and light. But here they were, tethered in a silence that didn't feel empty. Each morning, Eli played her favorite tracks from his tablet. He set the speaker gently on her nightstand, just loud enough to fill the room. Jazz. Soul. Old-school hip-hop with warm beats and soft melodies. Sometimes he tapped his hand on the tray table in rhythm. Other times, he just watched her, eyes pleading, like he was daring her to open hers. On the 4th morning, as the sun pushed through the blinds in slanted gold lines, Talia stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, her brows furrowed. The steady beeping of the heart monitor sped up. Eli's head snapped up. He moved instinctively, leaning forward, holding his breath. Talia opened her eyes slowly, blinking at the light, her gaze wandering until it landed on him. Her lips parted, too dry to form words, but she smiled, weak, crooked, but real. Eli grinned for the first time in months. Linda, standing near the door, turned away and wiped her eyes. Later that afternoon, after Talia had been given broth and her fever had dropped a few more degrees, Eli did something no one expected. He stood. It was shaky, clumsy. His legs quivered beneath him, his muscles not yet ready for such a bold act. But with Linda's help and a walker beside him, he pulled himself upright. He hadn't done it in months, not without intense physical therapy. But something in Talia's smile lit a fuse deep within him. He stepped, just 1 foot forward, then another, until he stood by her bedside, his knees nearly buckling. Talia's eyes widened in awe. Slowly, Eli reached out his hand. Talia, still half reclined, lifted her own, placing it in his. They didn't need music. Eli moved his arm slightly to the side, and Talia mirrored it. It was the barest trace of a dance, no spinning, no lifts, no sweeping motions. But it was theirs. A quiet sway between a boy once told he might never walk and a girl who danced when the world gave her nothing else. Nurses gathered in the hallway, watching in stunned silence. One of them wiped away tears. Linda clutched her chest. Even Mr. Walker, standing in the doorway in his designer coat and unreadable expression, let out a breath that trembled as it escaped. 6 months later, the corner of 73rd and Madison stood quiet in the morning light. There were no barefoot pirouettes, no speakers perched on a van dashboard, no girls spinning through the cold with joy stitched into her movements. But the memory of it lingered, etched into the air like chalk dust, carried by whispers and the ghosts of old rhythms. Passers-by still slowed near that corner. Some remembered. A few even paused, as if hoping to catch a glimpse of something magical that once bloomed between the cracks in the concrete. But Talia wasn't there anymore. She wasn't dancing for survival now. Tonight, she was dancing for the world. The auditorium was packed, every seat filled, every heart waiting. The benefit gala had drawn in a crowd of New York's finest. Celebrities, philanthropists, politicians, and press sat shoulder to shoulder beneath the warm glow of chandeliers and spotlights. A massive banner hung above the stage, the rhythm of hope, a night for youth without homes. Beneath it, a smaller line in gold, presented by the Walker Foundation. Backstage, Talia stood barefoot once again. Not because she had no shoes, but because she chose to feel the floor beneath her, like she used to. She wore a soft cream dress that floated around her knees, her curls pulled back with a ribbon. Her heartbeat thudded beneath her ribs like a drum roll. She took a breath. Closed her eyes. Across from her, Eli waited, seated in his custom wheelchair, sleek, motorized, but modified with foot supports for standing, just in case. He wore a crisp black suit and a quiet, patient smile. In the last few months, he'd learned how to stand for longer. Sometimes even walk with support. But tonight, he told her, he didn't want to force anything. "We'll dance the way we always did," he had typed into his tablet. Side by side. A soft hand touched her shoulder. "Mr. Walker." He didn't say much. He rarely did. But his eyes were different now, softer, humbled. He nodded once. Talia nodded back. The curtain rose. A hush fell across the room. Music began, not from a massive speaker, but from the very same tablet Eli had brought to the sidewalk all those months ago. The same soft jazz tune they first shared drifted through the air, gentle and familiar, like an old friend. Talia stepped forward. Her feet moved across polished wood like it was the pavement she once called her stage. She spun slowly, then reached out. Eli rolled forward, then lifted one arm to meet hers. The lights warmed their faces. Together, they began their duet, slow, expressive, shaped by memory and defiance and something deeper than choreography. Gasps rose from the crowd. This was not just a performance. It was a story being told through motion. Of pain and joy, of survival and connection. They danced through the beats of their journey, a girl who had no one, a boy who had everything except freedom, and a chance meeting that gave them both more than they'd ever imagined. At one point, Eli pushed himself to a standing position. It wasn't perfect. His knees trembled. His hand clutched the handle of his chair. But he stood, and the audience sat frozen, breath held. Talia didn't help him. She just turned and extended her hand, same as she had in the hospital room, and he took it. They swayed. Together. In the crowd, Linda clutched her program like a lifeline. Beside her, Mr. Walker sat forward, elbows on his knees, not bothering to hide the tears running down his cheeks. The music built to a soft crescendo. And then, as the last note echoed into silence, Eli sank gently back into his chair. Talia bowed low, arms still outstretched, fingers brushing his. The applause erupted. It started in a wave and became a roar. Thunderous, sustained, filled with awe and something else, belief. Phones lit up the room, recording, sharing. Tears ran freely down cheeks both famous and forgotten. The video would go viral before midnight, but in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the undeniable truth on stage, that kindness could crack through the hardest walls, that art could be born in alleyways, and that miracles sometimes started with a simple dance. Afterward, at the reception, donors pledged millions for homeless youth programs. The Walker Foundation announced the creation of a new art school scholarship in Talia's name. She would be its first recipient. Eli spoke publicly for the first time since his accident, his voice unsteady but firm as he said, "She didn't just teach me to move. She reminded me why moving matters." People asked them about the sidewalk. About how it all started. Talia just smiled and said, "We were both invisible until we saw each other." She looked over at Eli. He nodded. They hadn't just shared music. They had built a bridge between two broken worlds, and danced across it.